Welcome to the debate. It is Saturday, January 24th, 2026. Usually when we sit down here, our job is to act as observers. We look at the architecture of the albums, we dissect the corporate structure of Orison Holdings, and we trace the narrative arc of the artist known as DLB. We're normally the ones holding the scalpel. But today the dynamic has shifted, fundamentally. Today, we aren't just analyzing the work. In a very real and, frankly, very surreal sense, we've become the work.
We have indeed. And I suppose I should probably clarify for the record that when you say we, the laser pointer is aimed rather specifically at my side of the desk. I seem to have become the unwitting muse for a very, very angry man.
It certainly appears that way. For context, for everyone listening, we're talking about the situation that's unfolded over just the last 48 hours. A new audio file titled 0001D.lb that Hustle Harmonics break has been leaked. And it wasn't dropped on Spotify, it wasn't sent to a magazine, it was released via a tweet. And not from some music blog, but from a prominent figure in the adult film industry on X. Someone completely outside the music world. And the track itself is a direct, lethal response to the commentary you provided on our last show regarding DLB's so-called architecture of self-destruction.
Which I stand by. Let's just be clear right out of the gate. I stand by every single word of it. The fact that it has apparently summoned the Reaper in the booth, as the fans are now calling him, doesn't invalidate the analysis. If anything, the reaction is the proof.
And that really brings us to the central question we have to debate today. This is the friction point. Does DLB's return to the studio, specifically to record this track aimed at your critique, does that validate your theory that his retirement is just a performance art piece? Or is this a necessary, impulsive defense of the truth-fluent code by an artist who refuses to let his life's narrative be reduced to, as he puts it, content? For my part, I am arguing that this track is a defense of integrity. It's a correction of the record, consistent with that Maybank 903 code of honor that he was raised on.
And I'm arguing, maybe paradoxically, since I am the subject of all this vitriol, that this very response proves my original point. The so-called silence of January 1st. It wasn't a hard stop. It was a pause for dramatic effect. By engaging with me, by engaging with us, DLB proves he is still operating as the architect. He simply cannot relinquish control of the narrative. He heard a dissenting voice, and he couldn't just let it be. He had to build a monument just to crush it.
Okay, so let's start with the catalyst. In our last discussion, you didn't just critique the music. You described DLB's documentation of his trauma as, and I'm quoting, a sophisticated narcissistic exercise. You questioned the authenticity of the pain, suggesting it was curated for the thank you for listening era. Now, I see this new track not as a lapse in his retirement, but as a kind of moral imperative within his whole 11-6 ecosystem. The core ethos of his brand, if you want to call it that, is truth fluent. You didn't just analyze the bars, you questioned the reality of the man's survival.
I question the presentation of the survival. There is a difference.
To him? I don't think there is. Listen to the lyrics in the leak. He says, and I quote, "You called my breakdown content like you studied my grief. You needed views on a stream, so you labeled my belief." And then he really twists the knife. "You said I curated collapse like it was part of a trend. I was fighting for my life. You was farming it to send." I mean, this isn't a man checking his quarterly projections. This is a visceral reaction to having his actual scars treated like they're abstract theories. You stripped the humanity from his exit, and he came back just to remind you there's a person behind the persona.
And that is a compelling, emotional argument. I will grant you that. I will. But look at the result. He raps, "I just heard what I was owed, then I rapped in your face." It is a ferocious verse. The skill it's undeniable. The cadence, the breath control, it's vintage DLB. But by responding, he has paradoxically validated the very thing I was critiquing. I argued that he cannot exist without that feedback loop. If the silence of January 1st was real, if he truly took the hard drive and walked away to guard his rest, then my commentary should have been irrelevant. It should have been noise in an empty room.
But you're not just noise. This show isn't some Reddit thread. You're a prominent voice analyzing his legacy.
Exactly. And by responding, he has elevated a podcast critique into the official canon of his discography. He has turned the debate into a prop for his narrative. It feels like Bayesian resonance.
Okay, you're going to have to unpack that one. Not everyone here is a biologist.
Right. In biology, Bayesian mimicry is when a harmless species mimics the warning signals of a harmful one to scare off predators. So, in this context, DLB is using Bayesian resonance. He's mimicking the behavior of an active, dangerous MC, the Reaper, to protect the vulnerable, retired version of himself. He creates a decoy. He throws out this track to keep the engagement alive, to keep us all talking, while pretending he wants silence. He claims he wants to disappear, but he orchestrates a leak that guarantees we spend the next month talking about absolutely nothing but him.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on the lyrics and the intent. You're looking at this through the lens of a media strategist or, a biologist in this case. You need to look at it through the lens of where he comes from. The track says, I did a decade in the dark. You reduced it to act. We have to connect this to the source material about his roots. Maybank, Texas, the 903 area code.
The Young Headbusters era? I'm familiar with the lore.
But it's not just lore. It's the psychology of the man. We know from all the biographical data that DLB faced a 4-year federal investigation, Operation Outreach. When he was barely an adult, this wasn't a parking ticket. This was the DEA, federal agencies sweeping through East Texas. He faced real prison time. He saw friends go away for decades. He has lived through what he calls the mud. So when you sit in a studio and call that curated collapse, you are violating a code that predates all of his corporate success.
I understand the gravity of his past.
Do you? Because in the world of the dirty South storyteller, if someone questions the authenticity of your pain or implies you faked your struggle for views, you don't issue a press release. You don't have a publicist deny it. You go to the booth. This is the G code. It's a survival mechanism. He isn't doing this for the algorithm. He's doing it because in his world, silence in the face of that specific accusation is an admission of guilt.
I appreciate the historical context. I do. And I don't deny the reality of his legal struggles in 2009, but we are in 2026. He's the head of VVV of Orison Holdings, a massive conglomerate. The lyric, "You built a take on a body that ain't yours to fake," is powerful, yes. But he is blurring the line between Daniel, the human being who suffered, and DLB, the armor he constructed. My argument was that the armor is what's performing. By lashing out at me, he's proving that the armor is still very much active. He is protecting the brand of authenticity with the same ferocity a CEO protects a trademark.
I disagree that it's brand protection. It's that can't be fucked with energy. It's the refusal to let an outsider rewrite his history. If he allows your narrative that he's just a manipulator of his own grief to stand unchallenged, he betrays the entire premise of the No Price on Peace series.
Then let's talk about the mechanism of this so-called defense. We have to discuss the nuclear option and the technical reality here. We spent weeks analyzing the "thank you for listening" leak where the studio chatter implies he took the hard drive to stop monetization. The narrative was, I am leaving and I'm taking the masters so Orison Holdings can't exploit them.
Correct. And this new leak confirms that narrative beautifully.
How can you possibly argue that? He's releasing music.
Because this track, Hustle Harmonics Break, it wasn't released on Spotify. It isn't on Apple Music. It wasn't monetized. It is a raw file, a Hustle Harmonics Break, a glitch in the system. If this was some big marketing stunt as you claim, it would be on streaming platforms generating royalties right now. Instead, it's a leaked file floating around on social media. This proves he is operating outside the corporate structure he built. He took the hard drive to prevent commercial exploitation, not to prevent artistic expression. He's showing us he can still speak, but he refuses to sell it.
Why is he in a studio in late January 2026? A studio requires engineers. It requires mixing. Listen to the sound of the track. This isn't a voice memo on an iPhone. This is the Hustle Harmonics signature sound, that cinematic low-end rumble, that documentary in a dark room aesthetic. That requires the team.
Or one very talented individual with a laptop.
No, this This sounds like Mika Nami on the boards. This sounds like Jihei Lee on the mix. This supports the theory that the he walked mid-session moment from the last album was a gambit.
A gambit implies a trick. I see it as a boundary.
It implies a strategy. The fact that he's listening to the Debate Show on a network he claims to have no affiliation with, that implies he is not guarding his rest like he claimed. He is hyper-aware of his reception. The ghost is still haunting the machine. He took the hard drive, sure, but he clearly brought it right back to the studio to load up a new beat the second his ego was bruised.
You call it ego, I call it accountability. But you mentioned the distribution earlier, and I want to drill down on that because it's the elephant in the room, the medium of the message. We can't ignore how this got out.
Indeed. It wasn't an anonymous drop on Reddit. It was released via a tweet by a very specific type of account. A high-profile adult film star on X.
A deliberate choice.
A cynical choice. This connects directly to the rumors we've all seen about Danny Our X and the NSW content mentions in the deep dive notes. It feels like a marketing stunt wrapped up in rebellion. If this was purely about honor, purely about correcting the record on his G-code background, why involve an adult film star? Why use an influencer known for viral reach in a completely different world?
Because it aligns perfectly with the outsider status of the 11.6 ecosystem. Think about it. D.O.B. has always aligned himself with the stigmatized. We know from the host profiles on the deep dive that the ecosystem supports sex workers, they support the LGBTQ+ community, they support the people society pushes to the margins. D.O.B. has made it very clear he views the music industry standards of morality as hypocritical. So by leaking this through an XXX influencer, he is bypassing the press-friendly outlets, the magazines and blogs he despises. He is using the underground, the taboo channels, because they represent truth-fluent environments.
That is a romantic, almost poetic view, but I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. It's strategic. Using a trendy influencer in that space maximizes viral reach, the very thing he claims to hate. It ensures the track spreads not just through music circles, but through the chaotic, high-traffic world of adult social media. It creates a convergence of audiences. It feels like he's weaponizing the taboo just to make sure he trends.
Or maybe he just trusts them more than he trusts Rolling Stone.
It is Batesian resonance in action again, using a decoy channel to amplify the signal while pretending to be silent. It's thirst trap marketing disguised as solidarity.
I'm not convinced, because that ignores the risk. Associating with that world carries a stigma that could damage his corporate legacy, the sort of Disney-fied version of his success that Orson Holdings relies on. He's burning bridges with the establishment to make this point. That is not a safe marketing play. That is a can't-be-fucked-with attitude. He's saying, I would rather stand with the outcasts than with the critics.
Well, speaking of critics and outcasts, let's pivot to the impact this has had on our own colleagues. We need to talk about the deep dive.
The sister show, Vivid Voices Media's other arm.
Yes, I listened to their reaction this morning. The hosts over there, they weren't just analyzing the track. They were visibly shaken. They referenced the Little Birdie in Texas, the Sentinel Network. They were terrified that the red dot was on them.
And rightfully so.
Is it rightful? These are fans. These are people who've dedicated years to decoding his work.
And this track functions as a boundary setting, where a panel turned target and a voice gets scraped. This isn't just about you or about the debate. It is a message to the entire ecosystem. He is protecting the 11.6 artists, Leona J., Tella Duwata, the Vegas Storm. He's showing them that even though he's left, the architect is still the guard dog. The deep dive hosts realize that the Sentinel Network, it's real. DLB is watching.
It effectively silences criticism through fear. You debated scars, now go choke on the name. That is a chilling line. And it worked. The deep dive hosts were scrambling to clarify they weren't the target, tripping over themselves to praise the track. But I have to ask, does this ultimately serve the legacy? Or does it just make DLB look like he's bullying commentators?
Bullying? He's punching up. He's attacking the analysts who sit in comfortable chairs, like us, and dissect his life for entertainment.
Is he punching up? He's a multi-millionaire mogul with a global network of sentinels. We are two people with microphones. But beyond the power dynamic, it contradicts his supposed indifference. If he's truly at peace, if he has truly found mercy, why does he care what we think? By responding, he proves he can't let go. He's chasing the viral he claims to despise because he's addicted to the relevance.
I would frame it differently. He isn't addicted to relevance. He's committed to accuracy. You mentioned the deep dive hosts noting the Hustle Harmonics beat. That specific sound suggests this track isn't a throwaway. It's an entry in the Echo archive. He isn't bullying. He's correcting the historical record. If he lets your critique stand, history records his trauma as a performance. By responding, he forces history to record his trauma as a fight.
A fight he's winning, technically, by dominating the conversation. But look at the line. That loop you regret when the walls vibrate. He knows the power he has. He knows he can make the walls vibrate. To use that power to crush a dissenting opinion, it feels like the villain arc he hinted at in Angels and Demons.
Or the Savage arc, rebirth of a savage.
Precisely. The savage doesn't retire. The savage attacks.
Let's also look at the timing. We're hearing all these rumors of a Leona Jai mega album dropping this month. You could argue this week is a distraction, or you could argue it's a shield. By drawing all the fire to himself, by making himself the villain, he takes the heat off Leona. He lets her release her project in peace, while the internet argues about DLB versus the debate.
That's a compelling argument. The sacrificial lamb theory. He martyred his own reputation to clear the lane for his artists. But if that's true, it's still a manipulation. It's still the architect pulling strings. It proves he didn't walk away. He is still managing the rollout, just from the shadows.
Is it manipulation or is it leadership? The main bank loyalty, last of a dying breed. You don't abandon your crew just because you retired.
You do if the retirement is real. If the exit is genuine, you trust them to stand on their own. You don't hover over the controls.
I think we're reaching the fundamental divide here. You see a man who cannot stop building. I see a man who cannot stop feeling.
And perhaps those are the same thing in his world.
As we wrap up, let's summarize where we stand on Hustle Harmonics break. To me, this leak is the rawest evidence yet that DLB is a human being, not some corporate entity. You poked the bipolar Scorpio, and the Reaper in the booth responded. The silence of January 1st wasn't emptiness, it was a loaded weapon. He used it to defend the integrity of his life's work. It's not content, it is a correction.
And I maintain that while the verse is a cinematic comeback, and I'll admit, hearing "I just heard what I was owed, then I rapped in your face," directed at me, was a singular, terrifying experience. It confirms that DLB cannot exist without an audience. The architect is still building, even if he claims to have burned the blueprints. He has successfully turned the debate into a permanent part of his Echo archive. I accept that I'm now the villain in his new narrative, but let's be clear, the fact that there is a new narrative proves the performance never ended.
A point of convergence, maybe. We both agree that the silence is over.
The silence was never real. The noise just changed frequency.
And the walls are certainly vibrating. Whether you view this as a defense of honor or a strategic decoy, the material DLB has left us and continues to leave us demands engagement.
Indeed. And he knows we will keep listening. That is the trap. And we just walked right into it.
We encourage you to listen to the leak, explore the Thank You for Listening archive, and decide for yourselves. Is it a defense or is it a show? But be careful which walls you knock on.
The architect is definitely listening.
Until next time.